So, Berto, a colleague of mine once called me, and this was a while ago, so I might misremember some of the details, but this is my memory. She called me and she said that she was working with a client who, family client. It was a parents and a daughter. Daughter was defying the rules and maybe using pot, and
pot
grades were going down, and the father was really worried and trying to get his daughter to follow the rules. Don't run away from home. Stop talking back. Clean her room. Mother was also involved.
Yeah.
And they had a middle-class life. Girl went to a good school. Pretty typical family therapy client. Very, very common presenting problems. Well, my colleague calls me and says that had I read the news, and I was like, well, what do you mean? She's like, well, my client, the father and the client killed the daughter and maybe the wife too, and himself. I can't remember the full.
This isn't the whole fire thing?
No, this isn't
the fire thing.
No, this is not the fire thing.
Okay.
We'll get into that too, but this was a very small story in the news.
Oh my God.
It wasn't national. It was just local to Seattle. And the thing that was so horrible about it, I mean, obviously it's a tragedy, and people dying and murder is awful, and why, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my colleague was the family therapist that day. I think
they had a meeting that day.
I think so.
Oh.
I think it was like,
oh my God.
She had a meeting with. Again, this could all be mixed up in my head, but in my head, I have this vision of my colleague having a family session alone with the father, and then right after, he dedicates himself to, killing his daughter, waits for her to come home, kills her, and I think killed himself. Not quite sure. It was a total shock, and you hear about these stories in the news. It's another thing for me to hear about it so close to me, and then for me to worry, like, do I have any clients that might do that?
Yeah.
It's a thing, right? So have you heard of these stories, and what do you think of them, Berto?
Every time I'm skimming the news and I see one of these headlines, it's just so devastating. I have a very very visual mind. I envision things really easily, pretty empathetic. So like when I'm reading even the headline, I immediately like start picturing the scenario and just the horror of the situation, the confusion in the little kids' heads. Why is daddy doing, like, what's happening? Just terrible.
It's awful. So patron Matt wrote in and said, I'm interested in the psychology of family annihilators.
Oof.
So I didn't even know that was a term. Did you?
Yeah, no.
I live in Minneapolis, roughly a mile away from the triple murder suicide that happened recently. I've found some of the research to be really lacking. I think it would be a very good, interesting conversation to have on the podcast about domestic violence, personality disorders, compounded with depressive disorder, suicide, and guns. I think an episode on family annihilators could shed more light on the subject to better mitigate and intervene in these mass murderers. So let's talk about that, Berto. What do you say?
Let's sadly do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I work on a little startup doing pre-stuffed envelopes.
So, no joke, when I was in high school, I had a job where I stuffed envelopes
really?
All day long. Yeah.
Oh, we could have hired you.
Yeah. Actually, it's sort of an interesting story that I'll tell in another episode, remind me.
Okay.
But anyway, so on Facebook, I asked people, why do you think we're even interested in these kinds of stories? Because they just seem so awful, what's the fascination with it, right? Well, Charles said, I think we feel the need to understand something so horrible. Family annihilators typically come out of nowhere, and it's scary that there are no warning signs, it seems. It feels like it could happen at any time to anyone, hence the need to understand how this happens and any possible signs to look out for. So is that your sense, is that after these news stories come out, the sense is like there were no warning signs, it just seemed to come out of nowhere to people?
No, because, well, obviously, for the specific news item, it came out of nowhere for me, but I don't know anything about those people. I actually always sort of had the opposite reaction because, as much strife and crappy stuff that I had growing up as a kid, like, that's one thing that I never worried about or even for a second contemplated, that like my dad or my uncle or someone would like go on a killing spree. No one was physically abusive, and it's just like that thought never even entered my mind. I also didn't really see that growing up in movies or shows for whatever reason. So that was not a thing. And so I remember when I first would read these things, like not comprehending how someone would get to that point. So it's sort of like the opposite. Like, no, I don't feel that this is about to happen to anyone. I feel it's rare and horrifying. And even more so, that's why I was putting myself in the shoes of those kids. Like what? Now, as to whether it came out of nowhere for the individuals, well, I would venture to, I would imagine no. Like, I bet you that at least upon closer inspection, there would have been signs, but,
Well, we'll get into that for sure. What are the signs? Are there signs?
Yeah.
We'll get into that. Top fan Tasha on Facebook says, in theory, your family is the most trusted circle. The idea of being killed by someone that close to you is horrifying. So I guess that's why. I guess this is why we're interested in it. So a little history here. Dietz in 1986 was the first person to coin the term family annihilator in an American Medical Bulletin as a three category of the three categories of mass murders. So you have people who kill multiple people at the same time. You have family annihilators, you have pseudo commandos, and you have set and run killers. We won't go into details.
Sure.
There are other categories we'll get to in a second, but that's where we got the term family annihilator.
By the way, there's something so Darwinian about the idea that, we all have this like instinct to live, meaning, like we suck in air autonomically, and then we get hungry. And then on top of that, we have these layered things about how can I thrive? And then you pass that, you start having those feelings about like, ooh, I'm not going to be here forever, but my child might, or at least be longer than me. So I need to like protect that child. These cases are like the complete negation of all those instincts. Not only are you taking yourself out, you're taking the future that you put down on the earth out as well.
Yeah.
It's
right. The impulse to have sex, to raise children, to teach your children how to survive is logical when we map it onto evolution and the propagation of one's DNA. This behavior seems the direct opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
And hard to explain. And yet, we see enough of the phenomenon to say, well, definitely this is within human capacity and instinct to do. So what is the definition of a family annihilator, do you think?
It seems to me like someone whose target, it like you said, it's a subset of these individuals that go on a mass killing session, and the mass killing defined by, I don't know, more than 3 or something, and that their targets are not strangers, but instead are part of their family. And I imagine that a lot of times they include themselves.
It's a little bit more specific than that. It's a parent. So according to your definition, it could have been...
A kid could have been it.
Right. They usually exclude those.
Oh, interesting.
So these are parents who deliberately attempt to kill, and so they don't necessarily kill. So family annihilators might fail in their attempt, right? A parent who deliberately attempts to kill multiple members of their family, usually children and the other parent. Suicide is not part of the definition because many family annihilators don't attempt suicide. They often do.
Like that dude, the dude with the pregnant wife and the 2 girls.
Yeah, we'll talk about him. Actually, let's talk about him now. So famous examples.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most famous one in recent history was Chris Watts. 2018, 2 years ago, in Frederick, Colorado. He was having an affair. It seems he wanted to leave his family and wife to be with his new relationship.
Right.
And he strangled his pregnant wife to death. Then he smothered his 2 daughters to death and disposed of their bodies in oil tanks and buried his wife in a shallow grave at his work site. He tried to get away with it. He, didn't try to kill himself. There's all these famous videos of him, please, if anyone knows where they are, and also a famous police video of...
I watched all the police interrogation, all the neighbor footage with the cop, all the interviews with him with the media. I obsessed about this thing because it was so...
Why?
Because it was so incomprehensible.
I mean, it seems
I get the logic. I'm like, yeah, okay. For some reason, the wire short circuited, and the answer to him wanting to start a new life with this other person was he needed to annihilate everyone in his current life. It doesn't make sense, but anyways.
Well, you seem so hurt and distressed by this.
It really caused me and causes me stress.
Why did you consume so much information about it?
Well, that's a great question. So initially I didn't. They did happen to plaster it everywhere.
They did, but I managed to not see.
I know. What ended up happening though is I actually tangentially arrived at those videos of the police interrogations because I had been interested in watching police interrogation videos as a general category. So I've been watching a ton of them. And those I find pretty interesting because a lot of times they're not about just murderers. It could be about a whole bunch of types of crime and stuff. And I really find it fascinating how the cops like so patient and they have this technique that you don't see in the movies.
Right.
And so I find that interesting. Inevitably, it led me to the Watts ones, and I watched those, and then I started getting really upset, and then I got a little obsessive. And then I watched the neighbor footage, and then it was kind of like watching this train wreck where I'm like, this combination of this, like, psychopath but at the same time, like a complete dork when he's trying to cover his tracks.
Right.
Like he doesn't do anything right.
Right. And
it was just, I couldn't stop watching for some reason.
Right. It was a terrible attempt to cover up the murders.
I felt like it was a Coen Brothers movie or something,
Yeah.
It's just bad.
But you didn't answer my question. Like, and I get it. I've gone down rabbit holes, not this rabbit hole, but, last night I went down a Beatles rabbit hole where I wanted to learn everything about the song Long, Long, Long by George Harrison on
I love that song.
Yeah, it's one of my top probably 4 Beatles songs or something. And I last night I read all the history. There's all this history of like the recording day. Just a little detail that's sort of interesting is George brings the song in. The rest of the band had kind of heard it, but they came into the studio in the afternoon sometime, and because they were working on George's song, John typically didn't show up.
Oh, he was a prima donna?
Yeah, people often, this is a side tangent, but people often blame Paul. They're like, oh, Paul was the jerk, and George and Paul were fighting all the time.
Right.
But if you listen to George's songs, Paul is like...
instrumental.
Yeah, like literally.
Yeah.
And, to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, the piano part and the harmonies, to Someday, not Someday, Something. And to Long, 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 like Paul wrote the keyboard part.
Oh, interesting.
And did some of the harmonies and obviously wrote the bass part. Like those are critical parts. And Ringo has a great drum part. Anyway, listen to Long, Long, Long. But they came in like at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they recorded it like 60 times.
Oh my God.
So the way that they did this back then, they basically like rehearsed the song as they were recording it. And by the time they got to the final version, they're like, okay, well, that's probably good. And then they came back the next day and added just a couple overdubs. And it's live.
Yeah.
So it's George, George playing acoustic guitar, singing, Paul on the organ, and Ringo on the drums. And then later they came back and added bass, and another guy actually played piano, like this random engineer guy. Anyway.
Which album?
White Album.
White Album. Okay.
So I go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
But I was not distressed. I was elated to learn all this information about this Beatles song that I've loved for so long. And because a lot of the listeners right now are just like you.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say I don't go down rabbit holes that don't distress me either. You know, just watching the recent documentary "Don't Fuck with Cats," I was obsessed with that documentary. I couldn't put it down. I was like, what? And
but it was stressful.
It was not a happy documentary.
Yeah.
So why do you, in particular, and maybe it's universal, but why do you dive into something that's so distressful to you?
Okay, so I have personally always been fascinated with psychopaths. Even in high school. Actually, no, even as a kid, because I remember talking to my dad and having him explain to me, like, what's a psychopath?
But why?
Well, I don't know why that started.
That's the question. I get that.
No. But that, it's like saying, why are you fascinated with dinosaurs? Well, as a kid, it's because they're cool, they're big, they're fancy, right? But later
maybe
in life,
you don't know. If you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer.
Well, but later in life, you might say, well, the reason I love the National Museum of Natural History in New York is because of dinosaurs, right? But I don't know why dinosaurs are so appealing to a child. I don't know why psychopaths were appealing to me as a child. But I do know that. But I do know that that's one of the things that over the years has carried forward.
Right, but contemplate that. Yeah. Don't tell me the data. Tell me the why. You're telling me like.
But you're asking like why an 8-year-old finds something interesting.
And if you don't know the answer, then
I don't know
fine.
why psychopaths. But I do know that in this case. So if I'm drawing the Venn or the circle diagram of what are the contributing factors, one is that it's a psychopath type thing. That one's already gonna check that box. Second one is, this horror of like, here's on the you see those pictures, like this happy family, and with seemingly not enough cause, because people have affairs and get divorces all the time. 50% of the country or something, right? And not the affairs necessarily, but the divorces. So how do you go to that portrait of these beautiful girls and the smiling wife and the guy to like the murders, right? So that's another checkbox. The third one is the way in which he did it is so egregious. Like there could have been so many more quote unquote humane or quicker or whatever ways. So I think what starts accruing in my mind is the horror movie checkboxes. All of a sudden, I'm like, the things about me that like horror movies, which is probably the adrenaline rush and the fear of the grotesque and all this starts feeling like an actual horror movie.
Do you think you felt that adrenaline rush as you were deep diving into it?
Yeah, it's definitely like pulse quickening, anger too, like God, I wish we could stop this before it's.
Do you think it's a exercise of provoking just any emotion to have any emotion? Like when one feels lack of emotion and sort of lack of interest or lack of. And I've never thought about this before. I'm sure someone else has speculated this before.
Well, in my case, one thing it could be is the association, even though this is like the brutalist version of it, the association of breaking up a family being something that triggers me specifically.
Yeah.
So in other words, potentially, just like when I watched Kramer versus Kramer, that movie hit me hard because I felt I related to it so much.
For those who don't know, your mother abandoned you when you were a child. Your parents divorced.
Yeah.
And you had a number of different kinds of abandonments, so to speak, with lots of people as a child. And so seeing a movie about
a painful divorce and a breakup and sort of a mom who wasn't quite as engaged and things like that. So anyway, so that movie, for example, really triggered me, but I really love it, So there is potentially a thing about how this is a family, a broken up family, and it just happens to be broken up in a extreme grotesque way, but there could be something that triggers me to want to seek that out.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good speculation. It's a speculation I've had, is that people are attracted to to be attracted to a piece of chocolate, for example, makes sense because our brains are set up to flood our brains with all these nice chemicals when we eat certain substances and have certain compounds on our tongue, for example, or even just see a compound or see an image that's associated with the compound from before the association that goes to our, anyway. But when it comes to things that are distressing, that are horror movies, I can understand more easily because we all understand it's entertainment, it's not real. But to be attracted to a real event that and you in particular are more, rocked and affected negatively. And the image in your head,
Right.
So it's interesting. And again, a lot of listeners I think are like this too, because I feel like I'm not one of those people. I will deep dive on lots of odd things too, but for whatever reason, because the only reason why I know anything about these people is because people have been constantly asking me to do podcasts about it, and I have no natural inclination to learn about Ted Bundy or any of these people. It's just like, okay, I don't know why, but so what's the difference? Okay, so I think it is possible that for a lot of people who went through really difficult, horrific experiences growing up, that there's an attraction to, going to the scene of the crime. It's like you were 9/11, you were in Lower Manhattan and you survived it, and you want to go back to to ground zero every once in a while, even though you don't have good memories. Even though you remember the difficulty.
The other thought that came to mind just now actually is something about these cases. Usually, not always. Usually, they involve the man, the husband, going wacko and basically self-destructing, not only themselves but their family. And I think there's something about that too, because again, this is like these are like the horrific extreme versions of it. But in my dad's case, he kind of self-destructed his life, Not kind of, he did. Just not, he didn't commit murders, he didn't, go to jail, but essentially became unable to work and have money and all these things, and became a burden in that sense. And I think there's something to that as well, like this feeling. In fact, I remember this dream I had when I was a kid, when my dad was already struggling, and the dream was really horrific. In my dream, there were some robbers or something, some bad guys, and they beat my dad up, like really badly. I remember when I woke up, I was so horrified because it was like a really bloody movie or something, And then I remember feeling in the dream like how helpless I was, how helpless my dad was, and that was essentially the nightmare. And I was young. I was probably like 9 or 8 or something, and I still remember it to this day, like that feeling. And so that reality of feeling as a child, like, wow, like something's not quite right here. Like, I'm not sure what's happening, but like, I don't feel secure. And this person that I depend on seems to be like imploding or something. And so there might be a little bit of that too. Like I see these cases and it reminds me in this brutal fashion of like someone just losing it and ruining their whole life.
Right. So being reminded of something is something. Lots of things remind us, but why would we purposely suffer? And I think that the only speculation I can come up with, and I'm coming up with it right now, I think, is that it's a effort to return to the side of the crime to try to understand it. For someone who survived 9/11 to go to ground zero, it's like we tend to feel in a weird way, we're grieving, I think, on one level. So I guess that's another level. It gives us a chance to feel the emotions that maybe were left on the battlefield, so to speak. It gives us also a chance to feel a little safer, because it's like I'm now viewing it from the outside. I'm not actually in it anymore. I'm reviewing something. I'm not, it didn't happen to me. And but I wonder if, for people like you and people listening out there, and feel free to comment if you want to below, is do you think overall it's a net benefit to your life? And I think that's what I often think this about you, Humberto, in situations like this, because it sounds to me like half of that investigation was a return to the side of the scene of the crime of your childhood,
right,
and a way of trying to grieve the feelings and understand it better from another angle, like, oh, this is another train wreck father. why did they do that? Well, and I'm gaining some experience, or I'm not alone. It happens to other people,
right.
or some kind of general normal grief kind of process around it. But then I think another 50% is added on there of just like your own. You have the hand on the back of your head is like shoving your head into the internet.
Yeah.
And you're just like,
stop it.
And in Clockwork Orange, keeping your eyes open, and you're like, I don't want to see any, this is getting into my brain, man. Like, because not to put you through it again, but the Watts murders, I know it's in your head, but if people don't know, very detailed descriptions went out about how this man, it just boggles the mind. Yeah. Again, suburban house, the blonde middle-class family on the hill with, all the no rough edges on the corners in Colorado. And one day his wife's pregnant and he strangles her to death. One of the kids walks in the room and sees him doing it and says, "What are you doing to mommy?" And if I remember this right, and then he says, "Oh, she's just sick. We need to take her to the hospital." He puts his whole family in the car. Mom's already dead. Drives to his workplace. I think he buries the mom right at some point, either before or after he killed the kids, and then he grabs one of his daughters and smothers her to death in front of the other child. And this is all from his account, by the way. Because how would we know? Yeah. The other child says, sees the murder and says, "Please, Daddy, don't do this to me. Don't do what you did to my sister. Don't do it to me." And then he proceeds to murder that child. And then he dumps their bodies in oil drums and then buries his... Like this is not material for anyone to shove their head into. Right. It's not the return to your family crime. Like that wasn't what happened to you. You were abandoned and scared, but you weren't like utterly, murdered, flesh and bone torn apart by your father. Was struggled, but he never wanted to hurt you.
Right.
And so I posed the question, let's move on, but I want everyone to think about what they're doing to their brain when they expose themselves to this kind of stuff.
There's a third association that I made, which is that I've talked about before how when I was a kid, I really... I had these three incidents, major ones, and then probably smaller ones, where I would really fear the repercussions of telling my dad that I had done something wrong. And then I would like stress about it for months on end, sometimes even like probably a full year, and how much it weighed on me and how much it stressed me. As an example, one time it was that I had gotten in trouble for what a teacher in third grade thought was me making fun of them, and it wasn't at all. I was literally just frustrated that I didn't get a question correct, and I had to sign this book and take a letter home for my dad to sign, and I was really scared, and I never showed it to my dad, and I hid it under like a little piece of a sheet of paper in my desk at home, and for probably a year, that was always in my mind. I'm like, is today the day I come home and my dad has found that letter? And it was so stressful. And I hadn't even done anything wrong. I just got in trouble for something I didn't do. And yet I was so stressed. And over the years, this turned into like, I would have these recurring nightmares every now and then where it was in my nightmare, I had in my past at some point killed someone. And in the nightmare, all of a sudden I'm remembering it. I'm like, oh shoot. That's right. I killed someone, and I wonder if I'm going to get caught. Like, did I bury the bodies properly? What if the FBI's after me? Like, all of a sudden, I'd feel persecuted and horrified in my dream and super stressed. So I have that like thing. It hasn't luckily come back in many years now, but it was a theme. So I wonder if there's some of that too, which is these situations of these people finally confessing, being like, as horrible as it is, it's like,
oh,
a weight off my shoulders.
So you also kind of identify with the murderer as someone who is caught, and the relief. Your body, the way you expressed that was a relief of confession.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Which, by the way, I never got, and really stressed me with the OJ trial.
Right, you wanted him to confess. Yeah. Well, he did in that book.
Right.
So I'm not going to go into a lot of details, on individual family annihilators. I just did with Chris Watts. I wasn't actually going to go into those details, but I did to make a point. I hope it was worth it. I don't want to make this episode some sensational detail, thing. And there are plenty of other podcasts for that. And I don't judge them, but I just don't want this podcast to be like this. But I do want to talk about one other case because I think that it does illustrate, and I'm going to give some other examples, sort of, but just to put a fine point on, because we've been talking about fathers, but mothers do this too. 2001, Houston, Texas, Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in their bathtub. So it's similar to Chris Watts. She, with her own hands, drowned all 5 of her kids, aged 6 months to 7 years old.
Jeez.
There was a big media frenzy. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She claimed that she was suffering from postpartum depression, psychosis, and schizophrenia. She's still in a mental hospital today, 19 years later. So women will do this too.
Yeah.
It's rarer for sure, but it's not just men. There's something about parents that sometimes they do this. Okay, so let's go into the research. But before we do that, let's take a break. What do you say?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if a prosecutor who was putting one of these people away in prison decided to address the jury and say, become a patron of the podcast, what would he sound like?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard for several weeks nonstop accounts about how this listener just decided to basically end with all podcasts of this nature by just not supporting. And I don't know about you, but in my book, that's not right. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I ask you to do what's right and vote to have this listener become a patron today. Do it.
So, research. Well, this is a hard topic to research, a hard phenomenon to research because why do you think it's hard to research, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, what are you going to ask? Like, hey, percentage-wise, odds that you'll murder your family today, and then please report back every day.
Right.
And then after the fact, it's like, sure, can you interview the family after the fact? No, because they're dead. You can interview other members of the extended family and stuff. And there's just not that common.
Right. Good. That's a lot of it right there. It's extremely rare behavior.
Yeah.
And whenever you have extremely rare behavior and yet the factors that are present almost universally don't lead to that behavior, then, like people will say like, well, a lot of these guys, and I'll get into this, a lot of these guys are going through relationship problems.
Right.
Well, a lot of people are going through relationship problems. So the fact that 99.99999% of people who go through relationship problems do not murder anyone, let alone their family. But the fact that that's a commonality among these people doesn't really help in terms of our ability to predict future behavior. Yeah. So it's very rare behavior. Also, it's usually after the fact that we find out that it was heading in that direction. And then if the perpetrator even lives, then we can ask them questions and they have to be honest with us, which they might not be, right? So, and of course, the victims who were observers of this individual also often are dead themselves. So it's hard to know anything about this phenomenon based on that.
I'd say, I'd venture to imagine that many cases might have been preceded by some form of abuse, like abusive parenting or abuse, physical or other types of abuse. But then I also know how frequently abuse happens. So clearly it's not a one-to-one.
Right. So, but let's look at it, because there is a typical profile. But first, let's sort of zoom out a little bit and talk about some statistics. So, Berto, what do you think? The family annihilators account for what % of homicides per year in the United States?
Of homicides?
Yeah.
Oh, every 100, less than that. 0.5%.
Close, 0.1%.
Okay.
So 1 out of every 1,000 homicides involves...
That's actually still a lot.
Yeah, well, but this is actually not family annihilator. These are familicides, which is just like killing someone in your family.
Okay.
I
Still,
think,
I mean, that's
well, actually,
horrible,
no. Maybe it is for family annihilation. It'll become clear as we go over more of these stats. Within the category of multiple murders, so mass murders, being 2 or more in one incident. Let's see. Familicides, family annihilation, so we define family annihilation as not annihilating the whole family. It's just like
some portion of it.
2 or more. Familicides or family annihilation is what percentage of multiple murders. So, multiple murders, you have people who go into the McDonald's and kill a bunch of people.
That one would be higher. I'll go 10%.
41%.
Okay. Actually, I was almost going to go 50 because I'm thinking, if you are going to go kill a whole bunch of people, you're probably more likely to kill people that you know because they're right around you, but clearly not. Clearly still the majority is people you don't, or at least not family. So 40, huh?
Yeah. I found this was interesting because based on press, I would have assumed that mass murders, the vast majority of them did not involve family members, or only involved one family member, like the kid in Sandy Hook. Anyway, percentage of murders that were within the family. So not of mass murders, but single murders, multiple murders.
Single murders within the family?
So percentage of all murders that also includes single murders that are actually the victims are in the family.
And this doesn't include suicides, obviously. 60%.
Wow, that's high, 22%. So 22% of murders, the victims were family members of the perpetrator.
That's good. Yeah. That's good. Much better than 60%.
That's good.
Well, the reason, because I was thinking about it like, most
people are in conflict with their family members as opposed to a stranger, right?
Yeah. But it's great. This sucks. No word fits here. It's much less horrible that it's 20% than if it were 60%.
Well, I think what you're saying is you would rather get killed by a stranger than by a family member.
Yes. It's literally what I'm saying.
Percentage of murders of spouse.
Okay, so
22 are family members.
Of total murders, what percent are spouse?
What percentage
of 22%, what percent are spouse?
Of all murders.
Of all murders. Well, if 22% was some family, I'm going to go 15% spouse.
Close, 9%.
9%.
Percent murder of child by parent.
Child by parent. 5%.
Close, 6%. Gender of victim, female.
Ooh.
So these 60%. are family murders. Close, 58%. Percent murders of female victims with family member perpetrator. Oh, sorry. All victims of murders, of any murder, 60%, 58%.
So more women get killed than men.
More women get killed than men, yeah. And more men kill. But within family members, percentage female.
Within family members, it's 50%.
Close, 43.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting because, all murders are, you have 58% of females are family murder. Wait.
Yeah.
No, I think I have this wrong. I'm going to skip that because I think I'm reading it wrong. A percentage of children murdered by parents under the age of 13.
Eesh.
So, of kids, of children who are murdered, what percentage of them are actually younger? You know what I mean? Younger than 13.
3%.
No. Of all children that are murdered.
Of all children that are murdered. Oh, okay.
What percentage of them are younger than 13?
Then 13. Yeah. Okay. 50%.
80%.
Yeesh.
So the vast majority of, these family
That's
annihilations
so
involve, much younger children. Percentage of perpetrators who killed a family member who are male. So the perpetrators are male.
Man.
So of all the people who have killed a family member, what percentage of them are male?
70%.
Close, 80%. But again, the universal profile in one's mind, it's a dude.
Yeah.
But 20%, one out of five.
Yeah.
1 out of 5 of the murders of family members, the perpetrator is a woman. Percentage of perps who killed. Percentage of murders that use a firearm in with family murders versus non-family. So what percentage of murders use a firearm?
Okay, so with family members, I'd say it's probably 70%.
And with non-family?
It's probably 60%.
Yeah, so that's what I would have thought too. Not exactly those numbers, but I would have thought in a family it would be much more likely to be a gun, but it's actually less.
Okay.
50% of family murders are with a gun, and 68% of non-family are with a gun.
Okay.
I think it's because when people, unfortunately, when they kill their own family members, they have a lot of other ways to do it because they live with them.
Knives, they could,
Whereas with people that you don't know that well, you got to do it quick. You got to jump them fast.
Right.
And guns are Also, I think there's something to which we'll get into later. A lot of non-family murders are what we might call instrumental in terms of like that person witnessed a crime I did.
Right.
I need to kill him. Whereas a family member you do for potentially emotional reasons.
Yeah.
And that's why people tend to use more visceral, horrific means. Percentage of parents who use a firearm to kill children. So when parents kill children, the percentage of them that use a firearm.
When parents kill children, 50% use a firearm.
28%.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah. Percentage of spouses who use a firearm to kill their spouse.
50.
63.
Okay.
Percentage of murders of children that involve one parent killing multiple victims. Percentage of murders of children that involve one parent killing multiple children.
15%.
Let's see, 19%. So pretty close. So a good percentage, 1 out of 5. So out of every parent who kills a child, 1 out of 5 times they're killing multiple children.
Jeez.
Okay, but when it comes to family annihilators, people who kill 2 or more people in their family, percentage that are male.
Family annihilators, percentage that are male.
So we had 80% of perps when they kill at least one member, but when it's multiple.
90%.
So close, 95.
Yikes.
So a lot more male. So when men kill their family members, they're much more likely to kill multiple people.
Wow.
What's the most common age, do you think?
For the perp?
Age range for the perp, yeah. In the United States.
In their 30s.
Yeah, very good. You're just basing that on anecdote, right?
No, I'm well, maybe, but I'm also thinking about like in their 20s, they're too busy with themselves and trying to make a thing. And then in their 30s, all of a sudden they go through that not midlife, but like adult crisis where they're like, wait, what the hell's happening? And then they blame their family because now they don't have the same freedom, and then they kill them.
Huh. What about ethnicity?
White.
Yeah, mostly white. It's much more prevalent among white people in the United States.
That sucks. But is it just percentage-wise? Like,
yeah, it's a greater representation of white people.
So more than the percent of whites in the country?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. If you're white, you're more likely. Yeah.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Not to say that non-white people don't do it, because they do.
Right. I will say...
so the very typical profile is a 35-year-old white guy, typically middle class too.
Yeah. So I will say, I wonder if there's some correlation with how in Colombia, other countries and things like that, and maybe other cultures within this country, there's a lot closer intergenerational family alliance, meaning families tend to stick closer together. There's more help from the grandparents. There's more uncles and stuff. Because I gotta tell you, man, if you're a parental unit making it alone, the stress level must be much higher.
Right. Yeah, it's good. I absolutely imagine that's a factor. Precipitating events in one's life that is found to be fairly common among the perpetrators. What do you think it is?
In one's life?
Life events, that kind of thing.
Pregnancy.
No.
Loss of job.
Yes. So financial problems. But particularly loss of job as a subcategory of financial problem.
Okay.
What else?
Well, affairs probably. Maybe not.
No.
Okay.
That's in the category.
Health issues.
Nope. That stands to reason, but not a.
Oh man. What else could a person be going through?
When you said affair, what's the broader situation for that?
Relational problems.
Right. So relationship, usually a breakup. Divorce.
Yeah.
Chris Watts, for example, there are reports that the wife who died was threatening to leave and take the kids. So
is that the category? Relationship problems? Or?
It's hard to know, but yeah, usually they say broadly relationship problems, but
divorce then.
Yeah, divorce, breakup. Okay. But access to kids is also another, because that's sort of a symptom of problems.
But that's so ironic, right? Like, I can't access my kids. Fine, I'll kill them.
As you pointed out with evolution, there's a lot of irony to this behavior. And again, financial problems. A 2018 meta-analysis found that 80% of these perps had recent relationship problems, like divorce. Also, precipitating events are unhappiness, domestic violence, sexual abuse in the perp's child, in the childhood of the perpetrator. The perpetrator will often make threats of harm to self or other people, and also intoxication. So being intoxicated.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Alcohol is one of the biggest factors when it comes to impulse control and emotional regulation problems. And
spousal abuse and alcoholism are very correlated, right?
Murder, suicide, all these things. If we didn't have alcohol in our society, there'd be about half of, in my estimation, of any of these events. Wow. Okay, individual factors. So things that can raise one's risk of becoming a perpetrator of family annihilation.
As you pointed out, abuse, history of abuse.
Right, that's one.
Addiction.
Not necessarily addiction, but substance use problem.
Use, okay.
Yeah.
Anger control. Anger. Inability to control your anger.
Yep.
I suppose if you are a psychopath, like if you have, the patterns that we would see in a psychopath, therefore you might be like, you keep losing jobs, you keep having problems controlling your...
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason.
Yeah. But
a lot of these family annihilators didn't have a pattern of typical to psychopaths.
If you are... if you were abandoned as a child, I suppose, because you attachment issues.
Absolutely. So not only attachment, but feelings of abandonment.
Yeah.
So, it stands to reason for maybe not Chris Watts, but other family annihilators when we're being dumped and divorced, and maybe even our kids are being, taken away from us, that would trigger something real deep in us if we have sensitivity to abandonment.
I wonder if post-traumatic stress.
Nope.
If you were in the war or something, or no?
Nope.
Okay.
Others are feelings of inadequacy. So feeling like you're not good enough. And that makes you sense. So we have the major factor of breakup, divorce, relationship problems. So that triggers someone's essentially traumas around abandonment, or if you have traumas around inadequacy and not being able to provide. And so if you have financial problems, it digs pretty deep into people's...
Again, more irony, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't think I can provide? I'll show you how I can provide.
Or, which we'll get into, I'm such a bad provider, I need to protect my family
from how bad of a provider I am.
Right.
Jeez, man.
Other things are psychosis, which we haven't talked about yet. I mean, which we'll get into later. Being delusional can result.
Certainly.
Narcissistic rage, being suicidal. One study found that 60% of perpetrators were suicidal around the time. And that's one of the things that I always try to emphasize when I talk about these these sort of sensational killers and these sort of senseless killers. Again, if you're in the middle of a bank robbery and a police officer scares you and you shoot them, it's like, it's not good and it's
horrible.
But it's like
the logic is there.
The logic makes sense. Yeah. But for someone to just be like, you know what, for no reason at all, I'm going to plan a murder tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the thing that people walk away with, these people are psychopaths or there's something wrong with their brain. I want everyone to, at the very first thing, they should assume that person was suffering so bad that they were suicidal and they decided to take other people with them for whatever reason. Suicide to a lot of people can seem very strange. It's like, well, how could you get that upset? How could life be that bad? But we all accept that for some people that happens.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a very, grand leap to say for a suicidal person who's like, well, I'm going to kill myself tomorrow.
Yeah.
And to be that sort of in so much despair, it's not a big leap to say, and I think I'm going to take my family with me. You know what I mean?
Especially if you're blaming your despair on those targets, like
Exactly.
the Columbine people or something.
Exactly. So now what they do is abhorrent and wrong and immoral and terrible. And, if I had any advice to these people, it's just like, well, don't kill yourself. But if you do, don't take other people with you.
Right.
Like, that's not right. But I want people to understand that these are often suicidal issues that are blossoming into much worse issues.
Yeah.
Depression, 68% upon post-analysis would have a history of depressive symptoms. It's not really saying much because a lot of people have a history of depressive symptoms, but it is something to say. The original emailer asked about personality disorders. One study found that 38%, again, post-analysis, had borderline personality traits, meaning that for some of the people who end up killing, which we'll get into the typology later, the people who are vengeful, I'm being abandoned and I'm angry about it, and you're not listening to me. And they have a pattern of ramping up their attachment, signaling to other people like, I need you to not leave me.
Yeah.
And then for that to escalate to a point for a very, very, very small percentage of people with borderline who actually take it to a murder level. So there's that. But, other studies found no association between borderline and family annihilation. Other studies found connections between narcissistic personality or even dependent personality. What I'll say is that, and I'll get more into later in terms of what I think the personality disorders or the personality traits that are involved. I don't think any one personality disorder is actually associated with this. Certainly we could say narcissism, borderline, and psychopathy or antisocial would be more likely. But I don't think it's like a feature of those personality disorders. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. I definitely see, it seems a lot of those interrogation videos that I watched, obviously not everyone was the same at all, but there were a few that were kind of like the Watts case where it's like this sort of like lack of connection. It feels like they had almost no connection to the victims. If you were an outside observer and just walked in casually to the interrogation, you would think they're just like a witness, like a side witness or something. They just felt like they had no emotion about it whatsoever. Right. And then all of a sudden they would cry. Like in the Watts case, his dad arrives and all of a sudden he's crying. But like it really seemed like a functional reaction rather than like him, feeling it.
Yeah, I caution people in terms of evaluating personality based on those videos because it's such a specific context. The person is being, interrogated or potentially even mildly accused of murder. even people who have empathy have self-preservation. So it's hard to know. It certainly is data. It's not like it's not data. But I find that people will look at stuff like, oh, clearly a psychopath, and I'm like, well, we don't really know. I mean, a similar thing happened to Amanda Knox. When people looked at her behavior right after the murders, is because her, if she's innocent, then her roommate was brutally murdered, and she I think even discovered the murder. I'm not sure, and then right afterwards, she's hugging and kissing her boyfriend, and they seem very lovey, and people are filming that. And we point to that and go like, oh, clearly something's wrong with her. And it's just like, well, it's hard, we react to a lot of things in a lot of different ways, and we have phases of reaction, like we might kind of just be in a state of shock in one moment. I'm not saying Chris Watts isn't a psychopath. I'm just saying it's hard to draw a lot of conclusions from that.
There's something about it, like maybe they're good presenters or a good actor or something, because, like I work with a lot of different types of personalities. And in my industry, a lot of the personalities I work with, because stuffing envelopes is its own kind of thing, they are not the kind of person you can put in front of a mic and have them freely present to a crowd. They won't really know what to say. They'll be unsure of themselves. And
why would envelope stuffers have to present to a crowd?
Because you're the new, like we have, every year we come out with new models of envelopes and new features for the stuffing. So like you have to present it to the press and every year, have you heard of CES?
Yeah.
There's something like it for envelopes, so we present there every year.
Okay.
Anyways, but the bottom line is, these are not the people that you would put, and it's just like a certain personality style. If you put me in front of a mic and you tell me, hey, talk to these people about the new envelope line coming, I'll just improvise all day long, right? So I could imagine if one of these these personality types, committed some horrible murder, it would not be easy for them to stand in front of a press briefing and say, oh, I am, like do this whole presentation about how concerned they are, and that they would be standing there with a cop and a neighbor, and them being like, yeah, who knows what happened? Oh, so weird, So clearly, there must be something already, and again, I'm not saying psychopathy, it's just something about their personality type that lets them appear somewhat calm under this ridiculous, burden of pressure.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And
you give an example of public speaking. Well, literally everyone has done public speaking, or 99% of humans by a certain age have, had that experience, if not multiple times in one's life. How many people experience the interrogation after murdering your family?
Right.
And, how do we know what's normal in that situation? And for us to look at it, how can we even relate to that, in terms of how would I feel? It's just like, well, it's ridiculous. I would never even be there in the first place. It's just so bizarre, We could certainly imagine there to be quite a lot of preoccupation in one's mind, but maybe not. So anyway, I just caution people to draw conclusions based on police videos. It's data. It's not like it's not data, but it's hard to know. I think Chris Watts was a particular, given all the data that we have, I think you can draw some conclusions that are consistent with what you're saying. But anyway.
And I don't know what I'm saying is what I'm saying, but I'm saying there's something to the idea that, well, like prima facie, like he clearly, there's something clearly different in his head happening in that he murdered his family. That's obviously something, because day to day, if you draw the bell curve, most people are not murdering their family. So something's happening in his brain that's a little different from the norm. But then once that happens, there's something that he is able to do where he, for some amount of time, and he's not the best at it, because clearly there's way better people at it, but for some amount of time, he's able to just kind of like act, I won't even call it nonchalant, just act neutral about it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not an act. Maybe he literally feels neutral about it.
We'll get to that in a second, but we do have data on various different police interrogations of people who had murdered their family. And you do see some differences. For some people, they do seem cool as a cucumber. For other people, and there's overlaps in this, they do seem like dumbasses when it comes to like trying to cover it up.
Yeah.
For other people, they seem really quite emotional about it, like they've made a mistake.
Yeah.
And so, you don't see just one presentation, and that probably has something to do with personality. It's hard to know, though.
Clearly, Watts is not the same person as Ted Bundy. When you see Ted Bundy, he's like, of course he's nonchalant about the stuff, but it's in a different way. And like, he's charming, he's affable, he's getting you on his side, he's doing all these things. He's not talking, he's,
Yeah.
And
right. For Ted Bundy, he had a personality that was organized around defenses of gaining control over other people through social ability. Yeah. Chris Watts didn't have that. Yeah. And so that's a difference in personality. I think Chris Watts' defense in the moment after the murders was, if I was to speculate based on the little information I have, was that he lacked judgment so severely he hadn't thought about it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Also, I think he thought he could get away with it if he just kind of holds the line in terms of, well, I'll just, I have a story in my head and I'll just, because in his head he was hoping that it would be attributed to some random killer. Yeah. Right. He knew that the bodies were going to be found, and he was hoping that it would be attributed to like a coworker of his or something. Yeah. And so, I think ironically, or I don't know, his strategy was to play dumb, and boy, was he good at it. Yeah. So also other personality differences. A minority of the people who will family annihilate have been have sexually abused at least one of the children themselves. Really? Like on top, if it weren't bad enough, like. Right. So it's a part of a pattern, and possibly to, silence the victim kind of a thing. Also, access to a firearm is a factor, and also lack of judgment, like with Chris Watts. You bring up Ted Bundy. He exhibited, he lacked judgment throughout. Like people point like, oh, Ted Bundy got away with all stuff. But that was luck, man. But yeah, it was because law enforcement was so bad in the 70s. Yeah. You study that case. I mean, some of his very first murders, he goes to Lake Sammamish, a lake I would go to as a kid, and might have even been there the day that he killed a couple people. He drove up in his car without a disguise in broad daylight and introduced himself as Ted to people. And Lake Sammamish it's a state park. It's filled with humans. There's thousands of people. Walks up to a woman and says, "Hey, could you help me? Because I have this cast on my arm, which was fake. Could you help me put some stuff into my car?" Gets the girl in the car, goes off, kills her. Lots of witnesses are like, well, where was the last time you saw her? Well, we saw her talking to this guy named Ted. With a white VW. Well, a tan VW. Driving a tan VW. Well, in today's world, he would have been caught within an hour. The internet would be like, Facebook alone, you could figure out who that person was. Yeah. And or you would go on Facebook and find like the witnesses would be like, oh, that's the guy. Yeah. Or Google would be like, well, this guy's phone, is connected to a VW, or whatever. It'd be so. But even on the 70s, efforts, it was just a complete. He was still reckless, even by 70s. Yeah, but people look at him like, oh, well, he's a genius, and people think of these people. And the one thing I really I'm always driving home is 99% of psychopaths are not the sharpest tacks in the box. They're not the brightest bulb in the cupboard. These people are not the Hannibal Lecters. They almost always lack judgment. Why would they murder in the first place? Right. It's not even so. That's the other thing. To their advantage. Smart psychopaths don't murder. Why? Because it doesn't pay. Right. There are so many other ways to get you what you want. For Chris Watts, who clearly doesn't have empathy for other human beings, I mean, there's just no way he could do that, if he had the normal empathy for other people. The smart action would just be to divorce and move on. Exactly. Like normal people do. Like what he wanted to get rid of his family. He didn't want to have to deal with them anymore. And run away to Mexico. Yeah.
But don't even divorce. Just run away to Mexico.
Yeah, there's so many
Leave them alone.
There's so many options. Change your name.
Yeah.
Whatever. Or just make threats. I'll kill you if you. Like there's so many lesser.
Oh my gosh! Someone should start a foundation. Maybe I will someday. That basically offers no questions asked, plane tickets to like some other country. If you're feeling like you need to abandon your family, please don't kill them. Just come here. Like no questions asked. Just go. Passports and tickets. Go.
That you joke, but it's similar to those bins that they have for babies.
Right.
Like
abandon your baby.
Like certain communities, like a fire station or a hospital, will have this drop off for babies.
Right.
No questions asked.
Right. Because when you weigh these horrors, that's the much, much lesser evil.
Much lesser.
Like ridiculous, infinitely lesser.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, it's fine. It's like you want to give your kid up for adoption. Let's help you
do it.
Yeah.
So, anyways, but the thing with, you're right, because like the thing with some people like a Bundy or something, it's in spite of his incredible charm and charisma or blah 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 blah, he's constantly getting in his own way.
Right.
And so it's not about like the genius level intellect. It's really more about this compulsion they can't stop.
Right.
And they
it's a compulsion they can't stop.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
And they typically aren't very smart. And because if they were smarter, in all likelihood, they would figure out a way to sublimate their urge in a way that doesn't get them in trouble.
Yeah.
In a way that doesn't involve murder.
Right.
Maybe it's reading a lot of books that involve murder, or fantasizing, or I don't know, or having role play with a consenting adult.
Have the fine Chianti, have the fava beans, have the liver. Just have the liver from another kind of animal,
and get a CPR dummy, and and it puts the skin in the basket.
What's funny is like it's the only thing that's really funny, but it's an interesting thing that in our world, animal murder of certain types of animals is completely legal. You can just go get your hunting license. You can go shoot all you want. You can go skin them. You can like bask in the guts, all you want. You could eat all of it raw if you want. Just don't do it to humans.
Yeah.
That's a start.
It is kind of odd. It's like if someone kills someone's pet, or even a feral cat or a feral dog, that's somehow seen differently by the law and by society. But anyway.
Yeah.
So what factors in our society, so large societal variables, lead to an increase in family annihilation among its population?
What I was talking about, some of them, I think, the isolation of family units.
Okay.
In other words,
hard to measure that, but so we'll say
something that you could measure.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like two variables that are actually you can find in large data sets.
So divorce rates might be one of them. Maybe no. Okay. Certainly, the economic factors of the country.
That's the only thing.
Okay.
As the economy worsens, and again, it's hard to know because the N is so small.
Yeah.
But there is a bump in.
I see.
Actually, just general familicide.
So, like, if unemployment goes up, we might have more of these.
Right.
Okay.
But again, it's really rare. But yeah. What percentage of family annihilators kill themselves after?
Oh, okay. Oh, see, I would have said originally a really, really high percentage. I'm going to go 60%.
Close, 50.
Okay.
Which isn't the stereotype, right? At least in my mind. Because I would say most do kill themselves, but have to.
It seems like not. Yeah.
And when we get into the reasons why people do it, it'll be more clear. The other thing is this also doesn't include people who do suicide by cop.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because a lot of people will do suicide by police officers.
They know the authorities are on their way, and that's part of the plan.
So that's actually a rabbit hole that I go down. I watch a lot of badge cam videos.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know why. And some pretty not so great ones, they'll blur it out for YouTube, but you still get the gist of the terribleness. And people who like break down and analyze,
Were you arrested as a child, and so you want to relive that?
I don't know. It's why? Well, to answer my own question, it's like, why would I want to watch that? I think part of it is I like to see justice because it makes me feel safer.
Yeah.
I like to see, because the sort of videos that tend to be published are the ones where the good guys win, It's
like Law and Order.
Right. And I think it is something to do with having an emotion, you know, like even if it's not necessarily a happiness, joy, elated emotion. You know, when I watch movies and I'm going to cry the whole time, that's not a positive feeling. I'm sad for someone. And yet
you want the emotion.
That's a very enjoyable, quote unquote, thing. And
which is probably why we didn't like The Lighthouse.
Yeah. Well, I was crying on the inside as I was like, why am I watching this thing? I continue to hear reviews about how wonderful,
how life-changing it is.
Yeah. I'm just like, okay.
Oh, speaking of which, I had an OK Zoomer moment today. Have you heard of OK Zoomer?
No.
So you've heard of OK Boomer.
Yeah. Which I find to be incredibly ageist, by the way.
Right.
I actually have been going, just a side note, I've been going back and forth with people on Reddit because when I get triggered every time someone on Reddit like says OK Boomer, I'm like, so someone posted this video of this younger woman, she's probably 20 years old, and this older woman who looked like she was probably, I don't know, 80 years old and didn't seem very not confused, was angry that this younger woman took her parking space and was blocking her in, and they were going back and forth. And the post was, entitled "Boomer," blah blah blah.
Oh wow!
And I was like, what does this have to do with her being a boomer?
Yeah.
She's obviously doing something terrible, but and they're like, well, you know, boomers are entitled and they feel like they can do whatever they want. And, you know, have you ever worked in retail? Like the worst customers are boomers. And I'm like, is that true? Like,
wow.
I don't know.
Heard of this.
And I'm like, to me, and I said, every boomer I know would never do anything like this. I don't know anyone who would do it, let alone people like my parents and their age. And I asked, like, do you actually know any boomers? And so I feel like the internet is just like, it's this, because of this meme, it's this excuse to make fun of a certain section of our population that doesn't even make any sense.
So it seems like boomers might be fighting back, or someone is, because someone made up OK Zoomer, which is OK Generation Z.
Which is not a good idea because it's just another form of ageism. It's just like, if you're going to attack black people and then black people say, okay, you know, white people are stupid. It's like, no, any assumption based on age is not scientifically sound.
Right.
Idiots can be of any age.
It's not even age either. It's the time you were born, you know?
Yeah.
It's like the years you were born. But I was talking to someone. I made a joke at work. We were stuffing some envelopes and I'm like, hey, maybe we could figure out a way to make a better Rise of Skywalker. And this person who is younger than me says, I loved it.
Were you trying to think outside the envelope?
I was trying to think outside the envelope. Very good. Yes. That's our catchphrase, actually. Think outside the envelope. Thank you for giving us our catchphrase. I was sitting there and then they go, I actually loved the movie. And I go, oh, really? It's like,
did you punch him in the face?
It's a her.
Did you give her a paper cut? Did you like?
I would have. Yeah, I should have actually given her. But I'm like, oh, well. And she was like, well, what's your main problem with it? I'm like, well, the emperor shouldn't have come back. You know, I said that, and she says, well, yeah, I mean, I don't like the original movies anyways. So, and I was like, wait, what? You don't like the original? As in like 4, 5, 6? Yeah, like no, none of those are good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're all bad. I'm like, oh my god.
How old is she?
Probably mid to late 20s.
Yeah, which I get again because you know there are certain movies of old that came out and were loved before my time. Yeah. When I watch them and I'm like, I don't get it. Yeah. You like African Queen, I think, the one with Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. Right. That is a beloved movie, and when I watch it, I'm like, okay, I guess so. Or Citizen Kane, for that matter. Sure. So you know, I could absolutely imagine younger people, or anyone not of our generation, watching 4, 5, and 6, going like, I don't understand the obsession.
And grouping them with 1, 2, 3.
Right. Yeah. Because it's just like, it's all...
Anything before 7 is garbage.
Yeah. So, Zoomer, you said what?
No, I was saying it was an example of an OK Zoomer. I was being ageist, sorry.
So you said OK Zoomer to her?
I don't know if I said that to her. I'm just...
What does Zoomer mean? Is that...
Like his Generation Z, but I don't think she's Generation Z anyway. She'd be a millennial.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I apologize. I shouldn't be ageist.
So, different types of family annihilators. These are my terms. Some of them are borrowed from other people because a lot of people came out with different typologies, and so I kind of blended them all together in a compilation here. So, and understand that some of these family annihilators would probably be categorized in multiple categories. So it's not like people, you know, this person's definitely in this category, or all of them are definitely in one category. Anyway, so do you have any categories that you can spew first before we go into mine?
For the different kinds of family annihilators?
Yeah.
Sure, you know, but I mean, I'll just do 3. I think there is I'm done with life, and for whatever reason, I'm taking all of what my life means with me. So it's full on suicide, like intergenerational.
Okay,
the
good.
end of the Darwinian road.
So we'll go piece by piece here. So I called those people demoralized killers.
Okay.
So they are deeply disappointed in themselves and also how their family turned out. It's not really the ideal that they wanted it to turn out, and it's very much connected to their own self-esteem. Mm-hmm. So they're not only suicidal, but they also kind of they're not angry at their family per se, but they really feel like their identity is, a lot of these killers, by the way, their identity is extended into their family much greater than other people would be.
I see.
Where they either own their family, or if their life sucks, then surely their family sucks. You know what I mean? Like there's no separation of just like, well, my life sucks, but you know, I don't want to drag the rest of my family down because they don't have to suffer like I do, and they're not suffering the way I do. But for the family annihilators, there's this blurring of the boundaries in terms of identity, which has to do with this childhood mistreatment. But so the demoralized killer is one of those persons. So for example, I have a lot of examples from the UK, because there was this one study from the UK. UK, a man, 49 years old, he was worried about his family having an affair, so that's kind of a common theme. His son was dying of cancer, his like teenage son. He had moved away from his family and his support system to be with, you know, his wife and kids. His wife was doing much better in life as well. His children were adapting to the local culture and rejecting his traditional conservative religious ideals. And he felt very ashamed about that he was sort of losing his family. He felt very out of control. He felt like a failure. He felt like his wife was more successful in even having sex with another man, and was in a very bad place himself. Yeah. He killed his wife, his 4 daughters. His son died of natural causes of cancer soon after, and he also died in a house fire. Wow. So he lit the house on fire, and then the evidence shows he just died by smoke inhalation. So that's that category of person. And for these people, they are in a very bad negative headspace. Mm-hmm. They are suicidal, as we've been saying, and they also, I think, have at least a unstated hostility towards their family. You know, like maybe even jealousy of the fact that they're doing better than them. So that's that category. It's a little bit different than what you're talking about, but that's close enough. Well, what's another type that you think?
My second category is the golden goose category. So this is the type that, you know, the story of the goose where like it lays golden eggs, and then the person gets greedy and they're like, oh, I bet you if I cut into the goose, I'll have all the golden eggs, and the goose dies and no more golden eggs, right? So the analogy here is this person wants something different, like a new relationship, or they just don't want to have to deal with the kids. And their way of dealing with it is to kill the goose.
Right.
It's this convenience, but obviously they're not going to get what they want solution.
Right. So this is like Chris Watts. So I call this the convenience killer. Yeah. So it seems convenient to them.
Why wait for the goose to lay eggs slowly over the years?
Right. Now, for these people, they're not sadistic. I don't think Chris Watts was sadistic because he didn't show evidence of that prior to that, at least from the little I read. But massively attachment disordered, meaning just a huge detachment from other people, and exhibiting psychopathy. So there's many different many different types, or I don't know, flavors or types of disorders, personality-wise, that one could have that could lead to someone not having emotion about hurting another human being.
Yeah.
We typically attribute it to psychopathy, but it can be a part of other personality traits. And I don't really know if Chris Watts was a psychopath. He clearly lacked empathy for other human beings. At least he showed a lot of evidence of that. And I think that was born out of his own attachment disorder. I don't, not in the DSM sense of attachment disorder, but in the general sense. And I tried to Google his childhood history. I didn't find anything. Maybe something will come out eventually. But from all accounts, he had a wonderful childhood, but I suspect that it wasn't, at least in terms of, not necessarily abuse, but something went wrong in terms of the attunement to him so that he could develop a sense of connection with other people. And so he doesn't take pleasure in killing other people, but he certainly doesn't mind killing other people in the same way that most people don't mind, say, like they're going through a divorce and they're like, you know what, I'm going to sock away $10,000. Like that's a dick move, but most people will do it because they're upset and they're just like, well, I'm going to sock away this 10 grand.
Right.
And when the time comes to separate the, the assets, I won't report that 10 grand. Right. It's a dick move. It lacks empathy. It's lying. But a lot of people, or they'll fudge the numbers a little bit to kind of get a better deal in the divorce. So you wouldn't call that sadistic. You would just call that, like it's convenient to do that. You win but it's not horrible, but you win. Well, for the convenience killer, I think that for whatever reason, killing their family feels the same as like socking away 10 grand.
Yeah.
And so,
and in their heads, the math has come out somehow to killing their family is easier than the alternative paths to what they want.
Right. They have two paths ahead. They're like, well, one path is a normal path. I go through a divorce.
But he wants the hassle.
I share custody with the kids.
And then the embarrassment of like, we're getting a divorce. What will the neighbors say?
Yeah.
Instead, I'll just kill him.
And get a lot of sympathy.
Right.
Because, he went on TV.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And also, I won't have to pay any money, and I can go right into the sunset with this new woman, and I won't be bogged down by these other kids, and, which is actually a common scenario for people. They're often
oh my gosh, can you just imagine for a second, 20 years later in your life, you're sitting there in Guadalajara enjoying a martini or whatever you enjoy in Guadalajara, and you're like, I remember when I had a family and I killed them. Like, that's so incongruous. Like it's...
Yeah. Well, never underestimate the ability of the human mind to justify and twist reality.
Yeah.
What's another category?
My third category is psychosis. Like what they see is not what they get. They literally the dog started telling them that the child was demon possessed. Something really went wrong in their wiring. And so the killings were on their reality totally necessary because of some reasons that no one else can see.
Good. Yeah. I call him the psychotic killer. These people, again, not sadistic. They don't take pleasure in harming other people, but they have a temporary break from reality. And they're psychotic, they're delusional, and they have command hallucinations, like the dog telling them that they should kill people. And so that's real. It happens. It's a rare thing for psychosis. The vast majority of people who suffer from psychosis never have those kinds of command hallucinations, or even if they do, they don't follow them. But for some, it absolutely can be the reason why it happened, and so we need to recognize that. What's another category? Well,
I was only going to have three, but then I realized I need a bonus category because you were hinting at it the whole time here. Is fine. I'm just going to go the sadist.
Okay.
This person literally is sadistic, viciously sadistic. So one day they're like, you know what? You know who I can be super sadistic with? My family.
Yeah, it's not really a category found in the research. But
damn it. I thought you were going to, because you kept saying, they're not sadistic. They're not sadistic. Well, I'm like, well, there must be the sadistic ones then.
There is, but you're not describing it accurately. But once I say this category, it'll make total sense to you, and you've heard of other people like this, is what I'm calling the vengeful killer.
Okay, sure. Yeah,
so these people
I see what you're getting at.
These people aren't sadistic like Ted Bundy, but they definitely want
to get back.
Yeah, they want to harm. They take pleasure in getting back. These are the people who will exhibit
that makes sense.
A pattern of control and anger and intimidation prior to the actual killing.
And it really is a different category. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they tend to be narcissistic, borderline, potentially. They're very attachment insecure, meaning that any hint, like wife gets a text from someone, who was that, you know, or am I being cheated on? And they have to be at least slightly psychopathic, but not entirely, you know. And so they kill their families as a way of exerting control, typically over the spouse.
Eesh.
So killing the kids is usually motivated
like a side thing
by, it's just like, I know my spouse would be upset. And sometimes they'll just kill the kids and say, you made me do this.
Yeah.
And they'll leave the spouse alive.
This is your fault.
Right. Their identity spreads into their family, you know, because it's one thing to be like upset and insecure and be like, well, fuck these people, I'm going to leave. It's another thing to be like, my whole sense of who I am is defined by how my family is and how they see me and how we are together. You know, most of us have that, you know, in a good way. But if that's your only sense of identity and you can't pull away and say like, well, everything's going wrong over there, but I know I'm a good person and, you know, I can survive this without her or him or something.
You know, there's this very childish tactic that, you know, like you watch a little child, maybe like a 3-year-old or something, and let's say there's some limit imposed on them, like, you know, you've watched enough television, right? And they'll try to do something like, fine, I'll never watch television again then. And they think that this is somehow going to influence the adult as like, oh, okay, well, never mind. Please keep watching. But what they don't realize is, well, first of all, that'd be great. Like, you'd actually be a better off person if you don't watch TV. You're only hurting yourself, really. Like, you want to watch TV. Now you're saying you're never going to watch TV again. But in their little mind, it must be a way to like feel like they're in control of something because they get to say that they'll never watch TV again. Right.
Well, depending on sort of the calculus in their mind, it's a vengeful act. They're hurt and they're angry and they feel out of control and they feel like the only way to and they want to get back. Yeah. So it's a normal impulse that we all have. And
now you have an adult who's got his own or her own children.
Yeah.
And their way to get back is like, fine, I'll just kill the children to show you.
And I like your parallel with childishness because all of these killers, in my estimation, based on the profiles, is a arrested development. Mm-hmm. You know, that's why it's so hard for us to relate. Yeah. How could you possibly do that? But it's not hard for us to imagine if, say, a 3-year-old suddenly was married with children, for them to have an impulse control.
Yeah, like them to grab a pencil and try to stab their sister or her brother or uncle with the pencil.
Right.
We're like, oh, stop doing that. But you realize, oh, they're not a psychopath. They're a 2-year-old.
Right.
They're upset.
Right. For a 3-year-old to take a toy like a truck and smash it just because it looks like it might be funny,
right? Or
they're really angry,
right,
at their younger sister,
right?
Most of us understand that's not good, but it's not anything to take him to psychiatry for.
For a 3-year-old to come home from preschool and see that their grandma has finished the little pseudo Lego construction house and be so upset to smash all the pieces with their feet, basically ruining the set, clearly is a sign that I'm a psychopath.
Right. So when we look at children do that, because they lack power and we don't tend to give them guns, then it looks quaint or normal. But with the power and the availability of violence that an adult has, it's much more sort of strange to us. And we can imagine someone who wasn't able to develop correctly and had certain arrested development aspects of certain regressive aspects of their personality, when they get backed into a corner and they have all this abandonment issue and inadequacy issues, and they're just like, I'm going to eliminate what I believe to be the source of this problem. And I'm not going to use my mature mind. I'm not going to regulate my emotions. I don't know how. I don't know I don't have anyone to talk to. I'm just going to stamp the shit out of what I feel to be the source of my problems.
Right.
And then I will feel relief. You know what I mean? It's a very immature, all these types besides psychosis, which is a whole other category really. I think that's a major component of it.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, you think if we gave children guns of their own, then that would help.
Right. I mean, it's all about responsible gun ownership. Yes. So for the vengeful killer, their self-worth derives from their ability to control those around them, because and their sense of safety depends on them. So these people, they're typical domestic violence perpetrators, intimate partner violence. They tend to stalk people more often. They're very intimidating. They control. They often feel jealous. They're really triggered by humiliation and lack of control. Usually the spouse will start to leave. You know, they'll just be like, I don't like this anymore. And the spouse, and then they get angry at the spouse for the breakup. And usually there's a restriction of children, which, you know, even though these people might seem like monsters, they have attachment needs. And even if they're psychopathic, they have attachment needs. And they're attached to those kids, even if they're not very good parents, even if they're really immature. So, and that's one of the things people have a hard time understanding. And the way they frame these killers often is from this point of view, there's narrative that these people are basically like devils or something. They're human beings like any other. They want their kids just like any other. The evidence might show and accounts might show that they're not very good as parents, but there's a lot of people who aren't very good as parents and still love their kids. Do you know what I mean? So there's a primal, normal desperation of like, I want to have my children around. At the very least, to just have like validation that they're a good person, you know what I mean? And so when the spouse, because this person tends to be violent and make threats and whatnot, courts tend to listen to him more, society tends to listen to the other spouse more, and now you have, and I'm not saying that's wrong, it's probably a good thing, the kids are being ripped away from this person, and then they're just like, well, I am going to punish you, ex-spouse, or the person doesn't want their former spouse to have sex with other people, which can be a big threat to someone who has, I mean, it's a big threat to most people, but to people who have, you know, issues with this kind of abandonment and betrayal, they'll try to control it because the feelings are so bad. And one of the ways you can stop your former spouse from having sex with anyone else is to kill them. And so that will emerge in their mind. They're often narcissistic and they feel entitled. Again, these are the sadistic ones, but they're not like truly sadistic. They don't have sadistic personality disorder, but there's a pleasure. And it's the only category in here where it's just like, yes, I want to make them suffer. Particularly my ex-spouse. That is my goal, is to make the person, you know, because the convenient killer for Chris Watts, I don't think he, from the profile, it didn't seem like he was more the convenient killer. I don't think he wanted anyone to suffer. They were just in his way. He was on a life path and he was like, oh, these people are in my way, we'll just eliminate them. For the people who were demoralized as the killer, they are so depressed and just so down, they don't take pleasure in eliminating their family, but they just feel like, well, I might as well put them out of their misery too, kind of a thing. Like
projecting almost like, if I'm this miserable, I'm sure everyone's miserable.
Right. So an example of these kinds of people, a man thought his wife was cheating on him, so he killed their daughter and told the mother that she was to blame. In 2018, Coast Guard male, 44, fought with his wife, used his gun to kill her, and then used the gun to kill the 7-year-old son, and then used the gun to kill the 8-year-old daughter, and then killed himself. And it was like a string of fights between the parents, and one big fight happened, and then that happened. You could say O.J. Simpson, if we believe he
I
did.
was going to bring that up earlier.
Right. Even though he didn't kill children, it's not a stretch to imagine that if the kids were around, you know. So the other categories here, and I've sort of mentioned it, it's a shade off of the demoralized killer, but it's what I'm calling the pseudo-altruistic killer. Actually, I think that might be a term from another researcher. But so again, these are non-sadistic. They're not just like, they're not out to harm. They don't take pleasure in that. But they actually believe they kill the family to quote unquote save them. So they feel like they're a failure. They usually have financial or status failure. And their whole life, they've been focused on sort of having the perfect family, having the house on the hill and being rich. They're often suicidal. They usually kill themselves. And they kill their family to save them from their own failure in life, which, again, doesn't make any sense. For example, a man, millionaire, successful, but some downturn in his financial situation. He's losing his money. He was about to lose his house, this nice, big, humongous house in a nice neighborhood. So he obviously fell into some kind of despair of suicide, and had, his personality was such that he believed that, well, I need to take my family with me because of my problems.
Yeah.
He killed his daughter. He killed his wife. And then he doused the house in gasoline, started a blaze, and then they found him lying next to his wife, holding her, and he died from smoke inhalation. So this is a person that sounds like he was angry at his wife, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of, this is actually a pretty big rate of the people who family annihilate is this pseudo-altruistic group of people, where I'm saying pseudo because they feel like it's altruistic, but it's obviously isn't. And again, this is very immature, right? It's like the kid who you say, "Look, kid, if you don't stop having a meltdown, we all have to go home and not watch the movie."
Right.
And the kid's like, "Well, fuck you. Like, yeah, I don't care. Yeah. None of us are going to the movie because I'm upset." You know what I mean? Well, again, we look at the 3-year-old and we're like, well, it's 3-year-olds. It's not the best situation. We're going to try to teach that out of that kid. But, sometimes kids, they have meltdowns, and they're in an emotional state where they don't seem to have capacity to care about other human beings.
Right.
Extend that personality trait into adulthood, and you can imagine it manifesting in like, well, if my life sucks, I might as well bring everyone down with me. And I think this is actually a cause for the mass murders too, like the Las Vegas shooting and other kinds of mass murder suicides. It's like, my life sucks, the world sucks, I'm going to bring them with me. You know what I mean? Like, we're all going down, sort of a thing.
If I'm going down, we're all going down.
And the last category is the paranoid killer. This is people who kill their families to protect them from an outside threat.
Okay, so like they built a bunker. They think the end of the world is coming. And then, it's like that movie. What was the one, J.J. Abrams one? The one that was sort of a sequel, but not really, to... okay, so John Goodman...
Oh, yeah.
He's got the girls convinced that...
Oh, Cloverfield.
Cloverfield, yeah.
10 Lane or...
10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yeah. Right. So...
He doesn't kill him. But
so there's that, but there's also like Josh Powell, like the guy in Washington State who, if people don't know, I've done full episodes on this. I actually talked to Josh Powell's psychologist, but there was a guy who is pretty much well understood that he was going through a tough time with his wife. He had 2 kids, and his wife was wanting to leave him, and he was always kind of odd, and he was not very loving and would be harsh with his wife, and his wife was going to leave him, and he killed her and buried her somewhere in Utah.
Jeez.
And the police suspected him, but they couldn't pin it on him, and so he moves to Washington State with his kids. And long story short, the state was watching him to make sure that he was a good enough parent, because they suspected that his father was actually sexually abusing people. It's a long story. But anyway, so he could only see his kids with visitation. And there was a social worker who would have to be there for the safety of the kids, because the state was worried he might hurt the kids, even though there wasn't any strong evidence that he was. The social worker walks up to the front of the house, knocks on the door. Josh Powell opens the door, grabs the kids, pulls them inside, slams the door in the face of the social worker. And the social worker's like, I'm supposed to go into the house too.
Yeah.
And so she calls the police. By the time the police gets there, the house has completely blown up. He doused the entire... Well, first he took a hatchet to the kids' heads. Ugh. And there's evidence that the kids actually didn't die. They were just knocked out. And then and then he killed himself or burnt the house down or something. And it wasn't just like a slow blaze. It was, it like exploded.
He made sure there was no, yeah.
And this is a famous case, and so this person, Josh Powell, you could say that he was a vengeful killer, but you could also say he was a paranoid killer because he was very suspicious about CPS and the state, looking into his life and
all this state interference, trying to protect what? My kids? What's wrong with my kids? What do you think is going to happen to my kids? You know what? I'm going to kill them.
Right. So there's evidence that he did care about his children, because there are instances where he could have just let his kids go to the grandparents and he could have just moved on with his life, but he wanted to have his kids. Now, one could say it was only because he just wanted the control. I tend to believe that he had quote unquote normal kinds of parental instincts that a lot of parents have. And so he thought that, well, the world is against us. And he would often talk about that because, they lived in Utah and they weren't Mormon.
Oh, okay.
And the Mormon community, he saw them as this big threat.
Sure.
And so he would just had that kind of mindset of just like the world isn't safe. And
can you imagine that social worker, man?
Right. Right. And like, thank God he didn't kill her too, because he could have just easily grabbed all of them and killed them. Which again leads us to this conclusion of like, he wasn't out to kill people.
Yeah.
It was specific to his family.
Yeah.
He wasn't just interested in killing a bunch of people. He only wanted to kill his two sons. And there was evidence before that he cared about them. So how does that make any sense? If you have a paranoid mindset and believe that you are actually, your family's in danger and the only way out is to kill them, then that's why they do it. Another example in the UK, man, 36 years old, 2012, unemployed, known to be jealous and violent with past partners. He lost custody of his children. His children went into foster care. He got his children back because he did everything he could to get them back. He had some financial problems, trouble paying rent and such. He was worried he was going to lose his children again. And at the same time as he's worrying about, oh my God, I'm going to lose my kids again, his former partner, the mother of his children, got pregnant by another man. He learned about that, and then he killed his children and hanged himself.
Jeez, man. So,
in that situation, there wasn't evidence that he was doing it out of vengeance.
Yeah.
It's doing it out of this fear of some real or imagined threat from outside the family harming your own children. The last category I'll say, which is sort of like it's not a good category. It could be applied to any of the previous categories. I'm going to call culture honor killer. So this is, again, non-sadistic, but a lot of social pressure and social programming to believe in a certain, set of ideals that lead you to say, well, I have to kill.
Right. Like my daughter was seen holding hands with this man, so I'm going to bury her alive. And the mom was protesting, so she has to be buried alive too.
Right. Exactly. There's many stories like this. For example, a story that I read about in a study, a Pakistani family emigrated to the UK. One of the daughters wasn't following their traditions, and so both the parents actually killed her. Mainly the father, but the mother went along with it, and they were convicted. So this is and there are examples where they'll kill multiple people, as the example you gave. And so for this person, it's like, well, they could have been vengeful. You could also say they're sort of demoralized. You could say they're also paranoid. You could also say they're almost pseudo-altruistic, like I'm saving my daughter from the shame of society or something. So it's hard to say. Some people put it in its own category. Anyway, the last thing we'll talk about here, which I'm just going to briefly go over because we're running out of time, is evolutionary psychology. So in my paper, which is on our website, Psychology in Seattle, in which I do a deep dive. I wrote a small white paper on evolutionary psychology, and one of the chapters or one of the sections has to do with parents murdering children, because there are, in evolutionary psychology in the literature, they will try to answer that question. How, we see this behavior in humans, people killing their own kids. What is the evolutionary basis of it?
Yeah.
What do you think?
And you would think if it was like just a gene expression, by definition, it should end at that line. So you would think it would get rooted out over a few generations.
A single gene expression.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Like, but if enough of that gene leads to the family's ending,
yeah,
right? Like over time, there'd be less and less and less. And maybe that is true. Like, who knows? But so I think that a lot of what we do is based on a complex system that evolved to do a lot of different things, and there's a lot of side effects to that. So, for example, we certainly didn't evolve to play Fortnite constantly and stay up all night, but there are other systems at play that then, when combined with the stimulus from Fortnite, makes it so that we'll stay up all night playing Fortnite. So, in other words, in this case, I think that there are some instincts that developed naturally in animals and then in humans, things like actually preserving the family unit and being jealous of strange things and being guarded of strange things and feeling like you have to succeed in life because that is part of evolution. And then when in some variants of our population, when those things don't go right, the outcome is what it is, and the expression of it is based on those genes or on those instincts. But the way in which it's tried to resolve is not it's not sensical. It's not like it's similar to, you feel hunger, so that's natural, and then so you go eat 10 ice cream bowls, right? That's not the solution. So the thing with the instinct was totally right. You needed to eat. You get hungry. You have to eat. But the solution to it wasn't the right solution. And so in this case, it's
we're gonna get a lot of emails from the fat shaming episodes just based on.
Oh my God! I didn't mean ice cream. I meant some. But anyway, so the example here is like it is true. The person is depressed. They feel shame. They have real feelings of shame. They were really not treated well. They had some separation anxiety as a child. Whatever. All these things are real. And so then they feel like, ooh, they may be losing their family. But then the solution is not, the solution, it doesn't have to be the murders of the family.
Yeah, it's a perfectly good model of understanding. It's different in evolutionary psychology. So and I'm sort of summarizing my paper here. So some researchers try to explain why early humans, not modern, but early humans would have developed this adaptation. It's not a side effect. It's actually like a necessary part of survival of an overall gene pool to have an instinct to kill under certain circumstances, to kill your children. And what they find, and so they looked at many different. And this isn't necessarily parents who killed their spouse, but parents who killed their children. They identify the following key points regarding child murder by parents. Number one, most child homicides are perpetrated by their parents, half by mothers and half by fathers. Two, the highest risk of child homicide is on the first day of life. And these early acting perpetrators are often their mothers. So that's, it says something. It's like, why would the highest risk be of women killing their baby like on the first day?
Yeah.
3, step parents kill at much higher rates than biological parents. I actually saw research that said differently than that, but anyway. 4, motives from child murder include maltreatment, altruistic killing, acutely psychotic, unwanted child, and partner revenge. So similar to what we were talking about before.
By the way, sorry, the stepdad stat directly contradicts the mother stat.
Well, step parents kill at much higher rates than biological parents.
Yeah, but the mother stat was like right after birth, the mother.
Right. Well, that's among the spans of time that have the highest rate. It's right after birth. And anyway. 5, 24 nations, including the UK, Australia, have decreased penalties for mothers who kill their child within the first year of life. Did you know that?
I did not know that. But I mean, I'm assuming, I can imagine how this debate went. It's like, but again, it's similar to what the point I'm making. Look, a mother has so many chemicals and mental things happening during those first phases of postpartum that they can't be fully held accountable for all their actions. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I'm saying that this could be the logic that they're following. And so therefore, and so similar to what I'm saying is like, yeah, human brains are super complex and there's a lot of side effects from our complexity, but I would debate against saying that all the complexity we see had some really great purpose.
Yeah.
Or some necessary purpose.
Number 6, the U.S. rate of infanticide, I think this only includes young children, is 8 out of 100,000 in the United States. And in Canada, it's about half that at 3 per 100,000. So we do see some cultural differences, but it's such a small number, it's hard to know what the variability is. Number 7, despite public perception, a large percentage of child murderers are committed by parents who are not seriously mentally ill. So what these people are saying is that infanticide is an evolved reproductive strategy for early humans. So let me read my paper here. If a newborn was defective or born at a time when the parents are having difficulty, the child would require unwanted cost and effort in child rearing. As a real-world example of mothers in India who are hospitalized for postpartum mental illness, 43% had thought about murdering their child, and 36% had infanticidal behavior. So basically what they're saying is their speculation, and which is often sort of morphs into fact in their mind, which is silly, is that they believe that early humans adapted a mechanism, a psychological instinct, to kill one's children under times of difficulty. So 500,000 years ago, you're a family and you have a kid because you're having sex with your spouse or whoever, and there's a famine and drought.
Yeah.
We've run out of water, and the herds of elk or whatever can't be found.
Brontosaurus.
Can't be found.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sick and I'm weak. And so an adaptation would be selected for people, for people who don't have an instinct to kill their kids. Well, everyone dies, including the parents, because they're desperately trying to keep their kid alive, and then they die, and then the kid dies because there's no parents. But for those who have an adaptation of like, well, maybe it's time to kill my kid so that I can survive and have another kid later. Because if I keep this kid alive, this kid's going to drag this whole thing down. You know what I mean? And so that's their hypothesis. And so unknown, it's hard to know, but it certainly overlaps a bit with what we observe in these family annihilators, right? Their life is going down the tubes, and this instinct kicks in for a very small percentage of them that they're going to kill people. Having said that, there's a study in 2012 in India where they asked mothers who were hospitalized for mental illness, postpartum mental illness, probably depression, and about a third of them or more had actually thought about murdering their child.
Right.
So that, I don't know what that says. It's hard to know if we evolved that mechanism, but it's not a bad speculation.
Here's why I don't buy the conclusions that I think I'm hearing. Because of the following. Okay. Do I believe that animals, maybe in general, certain categories of animals, many categories of animals, evolved to have to be okay with death of their same kind at various different instances and cases and moving on from that death? Absolutely. I absolutely believe it, because you certainly could imagine if you were running a simulation and the creatures in question constantly stood at standstill when one of their own dies or when someone is sick and they have to leave it behind, that species would probably not last long in the harsh evolutionary history. So I could believe it. Like, just in general, at some points, animals got complex enough, and then one trait that was more successful than others was there are cases where the quote-unquote empathy switches in even primitive animals' heads needs to be switched off for the practicality of the moment. So we were being chased by lions, and I think I just need to keep running and not try to help my little gazelle child that is also running. In some cases, that might trigger on. Okay. This is true for humans as well, because we've evolved like that. Therefore, could I see that some of that same brain working could help when in older times there was no way to take care of a sick child born sick at birth, and therefore the kind of the communal instinct was like, yeah, this sucks. The child was born with blah blah blah. We need to put it out of its misery, and that just became a standard norm. And so there was kind of like just a cultural understanding of just like many people died at childbirth. You know, like women and children constantly died at childbirth from natural causes. So people were a lot more comfortable with the idea that, hey, childbirth is dangerous. People don't always survive these things. Sometimes we have to put them down anyways.
Yeah. What we see in other species, we actually will see them kill their offspring at times when it's perceived by the animal. Yeah. There's certain cues that indicate that resources are low.
Right.
And so it's not uncommon in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
And so the speculation is that that's why humans do it as well. It's hard. It's impossible to know because we're more complex than most other animals in terms of our motivation and our decision making. But
the most I would say is this, and I think it's just too general of a term to make a good conclusion out of it. But I think this is the most generalized thing we can say. Clearly, we did evolve some things, meaning that there were behaviors and genes that were over time preferred, and those survived. But the complexity generated from their combination leads to a myriad of unintended or unexpected consequences. Not intended, but just unexpected consequences. And so when you graph out all of humans and all their behaviors, you get a lot of outliers, and you can, in fact, explain a lot of it by factors that had some sort of natural advantage at some point. But that doesn't mean, and maybe this is not what they're implying, but that doesn't mean, therefore, that makes, good evolutionary sense. You know?
Totally. I mean, it's all just making shit up, because there's no way to test it. And our behavior is so varied and weird compared to other animals that it's just hard to know. The other part of this is that we have variability in terms of this behavior across different societies. The other thing is that, as we said earlier, 95% of family annihilators are men. Yeah. And men are socialized to be in control, to be aggressive, to not stand for humiliation. No one wants to be a cuckold. One of the biggest insults you can give someone on the internet today, which I find just to be hilarious, it's you cuck, right? Yeah. And when I was just thinking about this the other day, and I was just thinking, so you're insulting someone. It's just based, just a shade different perspective. It's not an insult, because to be the victim of someone cheating on you.
Yeah, it's like, you would think it'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Right. Like, it's obviously not your fault that you have an asshole of a spouse who cheated on you.
But in fact it is. It's like, you're a cuck.
Yeah, it's your fault. It's based on this notion that women, if you're manly enough or something,
they're not going to cheat on you.
They can't cheat on you. Yeah. And it's like, what? Women or people cheat on people for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes because you're quote unquote manly, you know what I mean? So it's just this funny thing. But anyway, it's this huge, we teach that to ourselves and can motivate, again, a very, 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 very small percentage of men to even consider doing this and then to take actions. The other thing I'll say is there's a massive critique on evolutionary psychology that I write about, and you can read my article on the website, that goes into these specific studies that picks apart, this thing. But the main thing is that I was wondering why researchers were even spending the time looking into this and writing about it. And that's always interesting, because just reading the study, you're just like, oh, but when you actually try to figure out, wait, what's the audience for this? Yeah. Who are these people? And what I found was a lot of these people, if not all of them, are court experts. So these are people that are called upon by the defense.
That's why I was just making my point, which is because that's what I sensed. Halfway through my point, I was thinking, because look, if all they're saying is that, yes, there are kind of innate traits in animals and humans that on accident, meaning accident by our current society standards, produce these outcomes in some small percentage of cases. Sure, that's interesting and not unexpected. But I sensed that there was an agenda.
Right. So because of our associations with evolution, we tend to associate it with lack of control.
Yeah.
If one evolves to crave sugar,
right,
and someone ends up eating too much sugar, we have an easier time saying, well, they're not to blame for that. But if someone chooses to eat sugar because they have lack of willpower, so if someone evolved to have an instinct to kill their children, then we should give them a lesser sentence, or we might not even give them a sentence at all. And that's why these articles are being published. And so in my critique, I say, okay, fine, you're making a speculation, but what are these things being used for? And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not interested in like making sure people go to jail for long periods of time. I don't really know, but that's the thing. So in conclusion, the final word on family annihilators is that we have those categories that I laid out. We have the culture honor killer, which is sort of a subset. You have psychotic killer, the demoralized killer, which is similar to the pseudo-altruistic killer, but not the same. You have the paranoid killer, which is also similar. And then you have the very distinct vengeful killer, and then the very distinct convenient killer. Yeah. And then you have people who are sort of a blend. And, the bottom line is these are tragic and horrible events.
Yep.
And when we, it's one thing when two gang members kill each other. It's tragic, but we sort of be like, well, they entered a world that was violent. They knew what they were getting into, and like
you feel bad for the families.
Yeah, they're 22 and they had a lifestyle, but when a parent kills a child, a young, I just can't help when I hear these stories to think about the life that was lost. Yeah. A 4-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. And it's just tragically and senselessly just taken away. She's erased from history.
And for me, because, so much of life is the moment, the present moment. For me, just that the infinite horror of that moment for that little child,
that final moment
of the lack of comprehension that the thing they depend on the most for survival is the thing that's annihilating them.
I know, just hearing that account of Chris Watts' other daughter saying,
please don't do this to me.
Please don't do what don't do to me what you just did to my sister. I mean, it just breaks the heart, to think that was the last thing.
Which is an interesting statement, because what happens is, I think, when a little child sees what an adult is doing, they don't always understand all the complexities, right?
Right. So it just looked bad to her, probably.
Yeah, and so, like, for example, that statement is similar to, like, if siblings go to the doctor and they see one of the child getting a shot,
right,
the child might likely say, "Oh, please don't do to me what they're doing to my sibling."
Right.
And then the enormity of the grotesqueness of that reality of that request, that innocent request.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You just want to go and sometimes before I fall asleep, as a way to occupy my brain, I'll think about if I had a time machine, what kind of noodling would I do? And sometimes I think about this sort of thing. I think about, I would type into the DeLorean to go to that time.
Yeah.
And I would go to, Chris Watts, and I'd be like, dude, I'm from the future and I know what you're about to do.
Yeah.
Don't be a dumbass.
Yeah.
Just divorce.
Run away.
Just divorce.
Here's $100. Go.
Or here's $10,000 because I also have a time machine. I can
you can do whatever. Invest in the stock. Right. Actually, that's great. You go and invest your money because you get the sports almanac, and then you live the life of Riley for decades, and then you forget about your original mission.
Well, let's end on that lighter note. And the final thing I'll say is, for people, you might have to detoxify yourself from this episode. So take care of yourself afterwards, notice your own body. The other thing is be careful about what you expose yourself to in the media. Just because it's news doesn't mean it's healthy. So be careful, because there is such a thing as vicarious trauma or secondary trauma. Having that image in my head of what Chris Watts did, and I guess I exposed everyone to that trauma through this episode, has a mild traumatic effect on me, which means for me that I have a little bit less hope in human beings. There's a little bit less hope for, I guess, even my own life. You just feel like, man, what's the point if this sort of evil is out there? So you just have to gauge how much of that evil you want to let get under your skin, because I think there is a limit to what we can stand constitutionally, even if it is, quote unquote, just the news. So please take care of yourself, and please take care of others. Oh, the final thing I'll say is that my estimation of all these perpetrators is that they were all mistreated. They were all alone. They all felt demoralized. They all felt suicidal, or they were backed into a corner. Yeah. You could say that their brain, that wasn't working right, or they were, I don't know, just bad people. But there's a lot of bad people in the world, yeah. And the thing is that if we pay more attention in general to the isolation and suffering of human beings overall, we'll get a lot of benefits, and and I believe that would reduce the number of these family annihilations by quite a bit. I wouldn't get rid of them, I don't think, but I think, specifically if we have to allocate, we have to tax the people, yeah. And we have to spend those taxes on helping parents raise their kids better, yep. And being a safety net, not just a financial safety net, but also like a support network safety net, yeah. For families that have complete, implosions around illness or finance or deaths or mental illness. Like that, people always say, well, we got to do something. And here's what we do. You raise the fucking money and you spend it. We have programs that work, that have data that show these are good effects. When you spend money in this community, 20 years later, less dropout, less crime, less drug abuse, less violence. And yet we don't do it. Yeah. So we have the answer, but we have to spend the money. And that means all of you out there have to actually pay more in taxes. Is it worth it to you? I hope it, because you're listeners to this podcast and you have a heart. And so, if you want to do something, you want to reduce family annihilations and all the other bad things in the world for the most part, talk to your politicians about social programs that actually help young children develop in ways that Mr. Rogers talked about in the 70s. We've known about this for a long time.
Yes. And I will add one thing is we're all of us working to destigmatize certain things. It's not going to help all cases. It's not going to help maybe even most of these cases. But, it's okay to end relationships. It's okay to move away. It's okay to make decisions in life that will be sad, but it's okay.
Yeah, don't stigmatize divorce.
Don't stigmatize divorce. Don't stigmatize being unemployed. Don't stigmatize getting cheated on. Don't stigmatize any of these things, because I think that does make things worse for a lot of people, is that they have all this additional pressure that's unnecessary.
And the way you can destigmatize is, I know all of you have been through those experiences. Talk about them if you can. Yeah. The more we out this sort of thing, when Ellen came out as gay, it massively reduced the stigma about being gay. So,
and I wonder, but I bet you that reduced some number of suicides that would have happened.
So if you've been cheated on, if you've been through a divorce, if you have felt like a failure, talk about it, out yourself. Yeah. Other people will be like, oh my God, me too. Yeah. So that's in line with what Berto's saying, which is a good idea. And please take care of yourself and other people, because
you deserve it.